Good afternoon. This is George Lees talking to you from Kelso in Scotland. That's Professor George Lees, who makes videos with a variety of people, all of whom are reluctant to make videos on the key issues that mean that you need to bring various factors together to understand the vicious world that we now live in and how the ownership of the world lives. So I'm going to try and use my timeline on my website. So that's my website is Prof George Lees Revelations / New World Order Timeline Black Forces at Work / Timeline Black Forces in the G8 G20 Profiteering Plot Crimes. Okay, and I'm gonna, because it covers 150 years, I'm gonna use only the pictures and try and summarize for you how the world ownership works. The world is owned by the money lenders that Jesus warned us about, even although Jesus himself is a fictitious character. The religious plots underpin a lot of the violence, a lot of the missions, a lot of the genocides, and the anti-Semitic campaigns in World War II are at the crux of how the culprits in the profiteering managed to evade detection and hide behind the genocidal crimes of people that they have actually trained to be world leaders and have gifted them the leadership of the various nation states that they represent. So we're beginning in 2014, and this is just a summary of what is happening in the world now, and you can see that we're taking us back to conventions and summits that were convened in World War II in places like Yalta. The last summit before the Twin Towers were brought down was in the place where the discoverer of America sailed from, in just above the Italian coast. I keep forgetting the name of the place, but in 2001 the summit was held in, I think it's Genoa. Okay, and you can see George W. Bush being indoctrinated in the Jewish faith by the Lubavitcher movement. That's in his recent regime, where he brutalized Iraq on very, very flimsy grounds, and we are now currently in June of 2014 re-brutalizing Iraq for the third time in a decade. On the right you can see the leader of the Israeli nation now, and a lot of the discussion as we move through the pictures and the timeline will be on the creation of Palestine and the political motives behind that, and the revelation that all of the 12 tribes that wandered around the Holy Land looking for a new nation have now been culled by the moneylenders who adopted the Jewish nation so they could use the anti-Semitic tool every time somebody turned the culprit finger on them. Okay, now the Jewish and the Israeli nation and the Semitic movement is so powerful that it controls almost every political party on the globe. Prime Minister Harper in Canada has been inducted into the Lubavitcher movement, and the Lubavitcher movement was all over British TV in the 1960s, thanks to a chap called Klaus Maswich, who we'll talk about later on further down the timeline. You can see that the Rothschilds use the same motif. The Rothschilds are effectively the world's owners, formerly known as the Bears from Eastern Europe. They adopted the Jewish religion rather than the fulminant explosion of Christianity, which is also a fraud perpetrated by the Pisos from Rome in 76 AD, when Vesuvius erupted on their home, the Villa Papyri. Okay, all of the terror and all of the fear-mongering now is generated by world leaders, and there are images there of the 7/7 bus bombings and all of the campaigns, including the Twin Towers here at the top, that we see that were brought down to initiate the attack on the last nations that still controlled their central bank. And the history of the global genocides in world wars is portrayed there. you can now see that what is happening in 2014 is that we have the demonization of Islam over there on the right. We've got intel penetration of every government and every media system on the globe, and now the CIA, MI6 and the quisling people from Mossad act as money launderers and terrorists all around the globe, and they train people to kill, and they make media films to make it look as if people get beheaded, to launch the ethnic hatred and to get us into effectively World War III, which could well mean the extinction of the human race, because we are run by fools and greedy buffoons who have been indoctrinated into these beliefs, and they're so greedy that they would be prepared to push that nuclear button to cover their shame. Okay, so let's go back to the root of the evil, and I've mentioned the money laundering. There's a picture of Lincoln being killed. It's dubious whether Lincoln was actually killed or shipped out like Lord Lucan from Britain. There's an image of Kennedy being killed, and we've got pictures of Senator Andrew Jackson. Now those guys were trying to take the ownership of the issuance of money back into democratic hands when they were killed. The democratic issuance of money has been owned by the Rothschilds and the five arrows, or the five flies, whichever you wish to call them, who were sent from Frankfurt to occupy the large financial capitals of the world. And one by one, every one of the world's central banks which issue money for public activities, for local councils, for national, federal issues, everything that should be funded from democracy is now funded by private interests, and many insightful and inspiring leaders have been killed for that cause. Kennedy was the last in I think it was 1963, and the legendary film about Air Force One is a joke about Executive Order 1111. They keep using the Freemasonic numbers as they, do these premeditated crimes, and 1111 is the signature or the signing off of the ownership of the central bank, or the federal bank as they call it in America, which was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson in Air Force One within hours of Kennedy's assassination. Now there's a lot of conjecture about who killed who and why it was done, but the issuance of money is the only real reason, and the people that have been in pursuit of that have now achieved all of their goals. And when they brutalise innocent countries now, it's just to cover their financial crimes. Let's move down. A lot of this is driven by Freemasons. Albert Pike was one of the early Freemasons in America, and this shows his triumph in culling the indigenous people. That's a pile of bones, and the Native American genocide is something that America is extremely proud of. That it's irreversible, and it means that the white man has taken over the whole of the indigenous Indians' country, and it was quite a brutal campaign, let me tell you. You can see the Masonic symbols coming in, and you can see that the working man who joins these clubs to keep his friends and is coerced into the evil activities that they engage in is on the verge of destroying our beautiful world. Albert Pike was incapable of keeping his horse as he crossed America. The horse fled from him, and he had to walk from one coast to the other. But his protocols live on, and they are now what we are seeing. All of the wars that we have had have been entirely for profit, and this shows you some of the jokers and some of the comedy programs that are set up. That's Tommy Cooper in the Fez, which is now the Islamic menace that we are pretending is the detonator for the war, the third war in a decade in Iraq. We've got people like Pike portrayed in those comedies called Dad's Army. Almost every one of those characters is a joke at a war profiteer, as you will see as we make our way through the series of images. There's another president to go for the issuance of money issue, James Garfield, and when they kill somebody or when they take them out for those greedy motives, almost always they joke at it. So that's around the 1880s that Garfield was killed, and Garfield becomes a cartoon character in popular culture, like the Dad's Army characters. I'll explain them as we go through. So let's now get on towards 1914, when we had the first of the massive culls. Of course, the first of them all in the ownership of the central banks that affected the English central bank was the Napoleonic Wars and the shenanigans in London in 1815, which were led by false news and the racing pigeons that the Rothschilds used to get the wrong news about the Waterloo conflict into the stock market in London so they could crash it and then sequester it into family hands. Okay? So there in 1909 is a pivotal event in America. We have invented by now the internal combustion engine and the tank, and we no longer need slaves, and there's a huge diaspora now. We've culled a lot of them already in the revolutionary wars in India, involving in America, involving the French, the British and the Native Americans. Not the Native Americans, they're already dead. They're in those piles of bones. And what we've got now is, you know, a diaspora of people relatively poor to the cities, and you've got the launch of racist movements like the KKK, and a lot of the things that we've talked about already portray twin towers, and they become relevant to the terror campaigns, but also to the literature that laughs at these premeditated plans. So the twin towers are also in the Lord of the Rings film, and the Lord of the Rings film is a parody about national treason, evil, and the ownership of the world, and you know, the people that actually own it. Almost all of the characters I've now detected are a joke at the people's expense. Bilbo was a racist senator in America. Okay, and some of these images take us to the modern day implications of what we're seeing. And there we've got the surviving Rothschilds, not in that particular picture, but we've got Rupert Murdoch, we've got Rebecca Brooks, we've got the younger Murdoch, we've got cabinet members, we've got the Prince of Wales, and we've got the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, and we've also got all of their director numbers in all of the frauds that they run from the Houses of Parliament or from their Chipping Norton cabals. They own all of the nations on the globe for several centuries already, and the focus in that image is on the Hermitage Development Trust, the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, the Future of Russia Foundation, British Sky Broadcasting Group plc, and the Prince of Wales's Charitable Foundation. All of it owned by fat cats in the West. All of those innocent nations brutalised and dominated by Western politicians for hundreds of years. Then we get into the pre-war periods in Europe. Now, all of the world leaders that are appointed and planted in power are trained to kill. They're trained to tyrannize their countries. And there we have images of Stalin on the left. He was trained at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations between 1907 and 1911. Between 1912 and 1913 we had Mussolini in those locations, and Hitler was trained in Liverpool round about the same era, and was obviously sent back to Germany to, you know, begin the campaign of the Third Reich. He began it in New Brunswick, or Brunswick in Germany, and Beaverbrook began his campaign in Canada in New Brunswick. They think it's really, really clever. The colour brown is still associated with fascism, as is the colour black, and you can see there several pivotal events in the London or the English training. When Stalin was released, this is the siege of Sydney Street near Tottenham Hotspur football ground in London, where several people were killed, One of the policemen was called Papa Sokolov, and in popular culture he became a character that was portrayed in a brothel as a masturbation service. Yeah, and they think it is really funny to laugh at all of the characters that are involved in here. Up at the top right there, you may not be able to see it here, but here we have Houston Stuart Chamberlain, the Iron Cross from the Kaiser. He's a romanticist, an Englishman who was sent to Germany pre-World War I. He's a winner of the Iron Cross in 1911, and he is one of the people that sparked the ethnic background, the Aryan image that drives the world apart every 30 to 70 years. Okay, and down at the bottom we've got the usual suspects, the funders, the five arrows, the issuance of money, the issuance of the currencies all across the globe. When America was originally occupied by the prospectors and the prospector classes, they had 6,000 centres for the issuance of cash, either mints or producing notes or bonds. And that is the triumph of the federal bank takeovers in every country. And the last banks to go were Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and surprisingly Cuba. It's been a centre of independence in the Caribbean for longer than the Americans and the Eastern and the European superpowers would like to believe. Then we get into World War I. Now, getting into World War I is easy to say. A lot of shenanigans were going on. We've got the cull of the Russian Tsars around the same period. The Romanovs have now made a comeback, and they are involved in the asset stripping of Hearts Football Club and the laundering of the cash from Edinburgh into Lithuania, and the central bank there is in charge of the law enforcement on the massive fraud. Okay, 1914, we've now got that diaspora into the cities in the hands of people like Jacob Schiff, Rabbi Stephen Wise, and a lot of the Americans that were forced into the cities were forced into World War I, and the songs that we hear singing by people like Eddie Cantor, which is a notorious Jewish cleric, clerical name rather, Eddie Cantor used to sing Over There about the culling of the former slaves in American uniforms all across Europe. It is quite tragic, and there are maps of Europe in that slide where you can see that up to 1917 the war was ticking along nicely, and in 1917 the Germans had made huge advances across the boundaries that were boundaries before the war started. But that is the time when the master plan to bring in the Americans was perpetrated out of America, and let me tell you a little bit more about that. There are some key names. The first are Louis Dembitz Brandeis, the first Jew appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States by President Woodrow Wilson. Now, a lot of the world's evil decisions are made because of coercion in the world, and President Wilson was an academic at Princeton University, and he had a sexual scandal with a professorial colleague. She was paid $40,000 to shut the fuck up, and he was told, you need to take America to war, even although you ran on the anti-war ticket when you were elected in 1914. So in 1916 they pulled the plug on that scam, and America was in there and pitching, culling its people, and that is the type of coercion that happens all of the time. So there you can see the slogans that Wilson used to be elected. Re-elect the man who will keep your sons out of the war, Woodrow Wilson. Samuel Untermeyer and Brandeis, which Brandeis explains the launch of Marlon Brando several decades later. They love to cover it up with a similar name. There's Wilson and Mrs. Wilson. That is not the woman that he had the affair with. Then you've got the Brandeis character, the penetration of the Jewish Supreme Court by the Supreme Court rather by Jews. Bill Clinton, when he was elected, and he is the Queen of England's, I forget whether he's the first cousin or is even closer than that. His biological father is Winston Churchill, and so is the Queen of England's. Yeah, that's thanks to Greg Hallett, who in the telling of this horrible history has, I believe, had his life taken. His books are now being sold by his assassins. Here you can see the same type of fraud that occurs much later, and Bill Clinton's able to get away with that identity fraud to be the American president, and they then put the sexual scandals on the front page rather than the genealogical scandals. After the wars were over in 1939, you've got another presidential scandal. Here's Harry S. Truman taking the $2 million bung to liberate Palestine, to create the nation of Israel. Okay, that's obviously after World War II, so we'll move down and see what happens in the lead up to World War II. There is the creation of Israel and the beginning of the dialogue on the creation of Israel with Lord Arthur James Balfour, who I was born on the Balfour farm in the Scottish borders, and I had no idea of the magnitude of these decisions and the weight of them until I became an adult, until I became a professor in neuroscience, and only when our money ran out in the neuroscience sector did I become interested in how all of these scams have turned into a ruthless wealth divide plot, and that there is no money left for any decent activity in global society. Okay, so there's a lot of debating to be done between 1920 and the creation of the central banks in Russia, in Switzerland, and the Balfour treaties and the negotiations around the creation of Israel were going on for quite a considerable time. One of the big motives was the Russian steppes and the oil there, and the genocidal killing of several indigenous peoples in those places is absolutely brutal, but all of it is explained in detail elsewhere on my timeline. As usual, the Rothschilds are at the epicenter of everything that happens, and there's another modern day image showing the world's biggest killer, Henry Kissinger, the execution of the Tsars, and the takeover of the manipulation of Russia by a couple of the Rothschilds here. That's one, young Nathan, and I think this is Jacob. You've got the Future of Russia Foundation, and let me just read off some of the 2013 to 14 directors that were on that or were former directors. Nathaniel Charles Jacob Rothschild, Timothy William Osborne, that's our Chancellor here, SJP Secretaries, Ambassador Arthur Adair Hartman, Dr. Henry Alfred Kissinger, the world's biggest killer. Yeah, he is America's highest ranking Mossad agent for several decades. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the cynicism that is behind all of the awards, all of the celebrities, and they're bringing them to power because they're members of these 2,000-year-old elite families, is just vicious. Much of this evidence has been brought forward by Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, but a lot of it came from my own research, and a lot of it came from Greg Hallett's absolutely peerless quest to find out how greed has conquered the world and generated the ownership of the world in a vicious mafia cabal. Okay, we're now into 1918 and the extension of the war using the ethnic hatred in America. So Brandeis and Untermeyer sparked the demonization of German goods, and that was enough to extend World War II by 2 brutal years. all of the new weapons that were shared by both sides, so that the Krupps and the profiteers from America could profit from the new technology to cull large numbers of people. The more they cull, the better it is for their ultimate goals, and that is how brutal the world is. And you've got now the intervention of people like Kalman Mayer Rothschild and the involvement of the papacy. Yeah, Kalman Mayer Rothschild was the first money lender to visit the Vatican, he got his ring on his finger kissed rather than he was allowed to kiss the ring on the Pope's finger. Every other visitor up to that point had to fall on his knees and kiss the feet of the Pope. Yeah, so they're now in charge, the Rothschilds, of the Vatican's money stream. And when you talk about diasporas and Nazis and fascists escaping from vast continents, then we have a perfect religious tool to help with that. Pope Pius XII was the Pope that had the canary on his shoulder, and the Canaries is a joke about the Canary Islands and the British and allied interests that allowed the Nazis, who were full team members of the profiteering exercises, to escape across the Atlantic using the Canaries as a stopover. It's still an intel money laundering haven for Britain even today. Okay, so there you see the position in 1914. Germany is in purple. By 1918, Germany had expanded so much, it's incredible to think that we had a declaration that Germany lost the war. But it wasn't about the war, it's about reparations, it's about the loans that were given to both sides, and how when you have major war crimes proceedings, the good people get culled. Yeah, it is evil. If they can make a fast buck, if they can kill an innocent, they will do it. Okay? And you can see that, you know, Germany losing the war is a myth. But the main thing for the bastards that planned it is that they cull millions and millions of innocents and bystanders, and all of their weapons are used on all sides, and then they form a truce, and they repeat the whole exercise in 39 simple steps as they write novels about the brutalization of the world in World War II. Okay, there we've got Winston Churchill, who negotiated the deal with the Rothschilds on the Russian steppes to take over the Russian oil output. Here we've got the lead up now in the 1930s to the first Rothschild World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, established in Basel in 1930. Here we see images of Hitler's birthplace, Branau am Inn, which is a joke about Jesus Christ's birthplace and having no room at the inn. The road where Hitler's home was labelled 999, which has tragically been the emergency call centre for all of the British Commonwealth troops all around the world, even although it's a joke at the Nazi power base, and their allegiance to the abdicated king, who spent the war peacefully and quite pleasurably with Mrs. Simpson in Paris, partying with the Free French. When people went to join the Free French in Buckinghamshire, which is a no-bombing zone in Britain, close to Oxford's no-bombing zone and Cambridge's no-bombing zone, then you begin to see the power of these cabals. We've seen this one already. Here on the right we have the launch of the modern day fascist movement. This is a man called Chambers, who's Prince Charles's financial advisor. Here we have Eric Maswich and the launch of the Zionist BBC movement in the 1960s. with the Daleks, who are required to mimic the Bank of International Settlements. If you look at the uniforms that Madonna wears at the Super Bowl and that Kylie wears as she's prancing around just before she has her breast cancer, you'll see that it is a parody of the architecture of the Bank of International Settlements. The Dalek is needed for the time shift that involves the religious fraud. So Jesus Christ was not invented until 80 years after his fictitious year of birth. That's why we need the TARDIS, and the BBC think that is hilarious. You get the Dr. Finlay things launched by Maswich, and all of the Andy-Pandy things that involve internment camp uniforms that were used in the culling of the poor Jews all across Europe in World War II. It is quite tragic when you understand exactly how it works. Here you've got a spy for Britain who was Czechoslovakian, lived in the same region as the people who were trading nuclear weapons for Mrs. Thatcher when David Cameron was part of the trade delegation with Dr. David Kelly, who lost his life just trying to win his innocent pension. Okay, so we're in 1932 still. Let's go down until we see another picture. I won't take you through the wordy bits. But there I was quite stunned by the independence and the liberation and the partitioning of Pakistan, the partitioning of Bengal, the Caliphate movement in World War I, and then the partitioning of Pakistan, because that occurred, I'm led to believe, out of Linlithgow, on the border, on the outskirts of Edinburgh, where I'm talking this weekend on how to free Scotland from the financial tyranny. So we were partitioning nation states like Israel out of the farm that I was born on, and in Linlithgow they partitioned Pakistan and India. Great strife, a great economic triumph for the empire upon which the sun may never set, but I believe it will be setting very, very soon. Into 1936 we have the rise of fascism in Britain. That's the Mitford sisters. Everyone was drawn to Hitler. There you can see Hitler, Simpson and the abdicated king. The king who replaced him was a buffoon with an IQ of 70. The person that was due to marry him saw that he was a buffoon, did not have the courage to marry him, defected from the palace, so he was married to a maid who became the Queen Mum, and the Queen's dad, as we've already declared, was created by Winston Churchill by artificial insemination. It is so twisted, it's incredible. But we've skipped the whole of Queen Victoria's tragic life and how the penetration by the Rothschilds and the King of Kings led to a massive fraudulent bloodline that still holds the British monarchy today, which is why Greg Hallett is dead in a ditch somewhere. He was taking a lawsuit against the illegitimacy of the British monarchy to David Cameron in 10 Downing Street, and he was a Skypey friend of mine during all of that period. Okay, here we see the Nazi rallies in London, and here you see scandals involving Formula One people, fascists from the Aitken dynasties and from the Clifford dynasties that are involved in fast motor racing. And the fast motor racing takes us back as far as the Greek gods, because what you've got there is the original Twin Towers were at the mouth of the Mediterranean near Gibraltar, and one of the Greek gods was, I forget what his name was, I think it's Python or Python, you know, the Monty Python joke eventually. He took the sun's chariot and he crashed it into the earth, and that's why we have scorched earth around that Mediterranean region and the Holy Lands. And all of those legends just keep getting morphed into new legends, and eventually it becomes the Lord of the Rings, and eventually it becomes the Twin Towers that are brought down before Bush and Blair storm into Iraq to take over one of the last central banks that was independent. Okay, so you've got fascism, and here we've got another Rothschild. This is a very rare species. This is an innocent Rothschild. That's him pictured here in his carriage, dragged by a zebra. Now, they love to laugh at everything that happens, and the troops in World War I had a particularly rough deal, but they needed to be stoic. And a Scottish other ranks analogy from World War I on this issue went like this: a zebra goes to this big flash farm and talks to two other animals and asks them what they do on this farm, and they tell them what they do. The zebra then goes to a big black bull sitting all alone in the field and says, "What do you do on this farm?" And the bull replies, "Take those silly fucking pyjamas off and I'll show you what I do." And here you see the bloodlines that mean that the second Baron Rothschild was related to Hitler, and he was related to other figures in the German side, and all of it is just a genealogical tragedy. But if you are the Rothschilds and the world leaders, it's a master plan, and the people dare not speak out against it, otherwise they get lined up against the wall and shot as national traitors if they don't already get the bullet in the head in the trenches or the nerve gas. This I find particularly tragic. I'm an honorary professor at Durham University, and when you go to the Durham Light Infantry Museum, you see these postcards, and my son's just been in Africa on a charitable mission, and we were not allowed to communicate with him, just like the trenches in World War I. Okay, they've dreamt up an Ebola epidemic, or there may even be an Ebola epidemic, but what you were allowed to do in World War I was tick a box that said, "I have received your letter, I have been admitted into hospital sick or wounded, I have received no letter from you, I am still alive, just, I am scared a bit, a lot, please send me a clean pair of underpants." Yeah, it's a joke. The people are dying in their millions in the trenches for a cause which has no cause, and the elites are laughing at them as they run the draft board back in the leafy county where they're completely immune from risk. So that takes us up to 1940 already. No pictures, let's keep going. I don't want to lose your attention span. And now we get into a period where intelligence and the interlocking intelligence agencies becomes vitally important. Okay, the Baker Street Irregulars, we've got the SOE, and we've got the leaders of the SOE. Let me tell you about them. Frank Nelson, trained in Heidelberg, which was also a no-bombing zone in World War II. Charles Jocelyn Hambro, a banking dynasty, friend of the Morgans, right at the head of the SOE, the spying networks. He operated in Norway, where the Prime Minister was called Quisling. That's straight up Quisling. Quisling was a deserter to his country, and he was allegedly executed at the end of the war, having given up the whole of Norway without any resistance. I don't believe he was executed. He was just tucked away somewhere on a haven to spend the rest of his life with a glass in his hand and some sexy women on his side. Colin Gubbins, born Japan, trained globally. All of them are double agents, all of them are banking dynasties, and it is tragic that they are able to get away with this for a second time in just 30 years. You've got there the plot to undermine the sovereignty of all of the nation states across Europe much later. That's led by Prince Philip and the Nazi Prince Bernhard, who was a Nazi in the lead up to World War II. Here we've got the lead up to World War II for real. We've got the straight line between the south of England through Brie, which is almost coincident with Waterloo, because this is a triumphant revival. Here you can see that straight line, Porton down, all the Secret Service institutions, the hole in the Maginot Line that was left in World War I in the Brie region, and all the way along the yellow brick road to Eastern Europe and to the Polish death camps. They think it's really funny. They've got the Black Horse for the Lloyds Banking Group on the Brie pub in the Lord of the Rings movie. You've got people like Portillo, who made 50 million quid in munitions scams later on in the Iraq periods. You've got the flood of the German troops to the Channel coast within a year of the conflict starting. You've got all of the ethnic hatred helped along by the Vatican and people like Bishop Hudal, who was from the same Austrian region as Hitler, and Arnie Schwarzenegger, who ended up in America. Like a lot of the Heidelberg and Göttingen nuclear physicists and rocket scientists, they are the ones that were challenged with Project Oppenheimer and the delivery of the bomb that ended the war in 1945. Okay, it's quite tragic. When you see from Porton down what it looks like when you look down on Stonehenge, you'll see that there's jokes about golf clubs and New World Order elite organisations. If there's a race course, if there's a golf club, if there's a cricket pitch, you can know that they are in it for the cash. Yeah, and it's the same today. Okay, here we see Dunkirk. We see the Allies retreating hopelessly back into Britain, and Dad's army, while they were waiting for the munitions magnates who were Churchill in the Admiralty and Beaverbrook in the Air Force munitions, they were given enough time to arm both sides again, and it is just ruthless. Okay? The intel was even worse. Everybody is riddled. All of their forces, all of their intelligence agencies are riddled by double agents. Here we have Ian Fleming. We have H.G. Wells, who scared the shit out of the world with a story about Martians coming to conquer America. Nobody would leave their homes for a whole weekend. He ends up in the War Office writing the propaganda to keep people in fear. We have no idea on the statistics now about how many were killed in death camps, and you have to pay for the Pathy news that used to be released in the cinema when I was a boy aged 5 or 6, and we used to see the horrific movies of people that looked like skeletons in those internment camps, and they were literally almost buried alive. It's tragic. And when you look at the Zionist movement and the films that they make now about in Bruges and assassination bureaus, and about the cynical manipulation of the political environment for cash, and then you watch the same actors portraying the Schindler's List shenanigans, it is desperately sad that the human race is capable of stooping so low. But what the Greg Hallett taught me is that this is all premeditated, and that when the war was over, that none of the actual culprits were brought to book. And what Greg has informed me of is that the operation to get the Nazis out of the war zone was called Operation Winnie the Pooh. Christopher Robin Goes to War, and the leading characters are portrayed in this slide now. So we've got John Ainsworth Davis, who played the role of Christopher Robin. We've got Ian Fleming, who was Winnie the Pooh himself. Now Ian Fleming is the author of the Bond novels, and we will talk about him in the last 10 minutes. because he's still a profiteer. That's his company, the British Syrian Society Limited. Yeah, that's Syria that has been brutalised in the last decade, a couple of times already. They are still manipulating the whole of the world's prospects from the tax havens. Okay? Winston Churchill was Tigger in the Winnie the Pooh shenanigans. Desmond Morton, who I believe was the creator of the Uncle movement, Uncle Morton, and that became a BBC joke called The Man from Uncle on the TV when I was just a boy again. Desmond Morton was Owl, General Ismay was the Heffalump, Patricia Falconer was Alice, King George VI was the author, A.A. Milne. That's the imbecile king who made the speech. Admiral Mountbatten was Charlemagne. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was Eeyore the donkey, which is otherwise a joke at Jesus Christ, 2,000-year-old joke at Jesus Christ. Ribbentrop was Roo. Adolf Hitler was Rabbit, and the SS were Rabbit's friends. Now, when Steve McQueen won the Oscar for whatever the slave film was this year, because they were covering up the young death of Steve McQueen, the Joker who escaped from the film in the Great Escape movie. Yet he died in his 40s because he was laughing at the cross-party profiteering, cross-border profiteering that was World War II. If you were lucky enough to be interned in Colditz, you got to have your manservant or your Batman with you. It is vicious, it is greedy, it is genocidal, and they get away with it time and again. There we see Theodore G. Bilbo, the KKK man that was prepared to shoot a black in the head because of his racist views. Here you see the modern day Freemasons in Norway that replaced Quisling. Quisling's nickname in Norway, that's him talking to Adolf Hitler, his nickname was Gimli, the dwarf in the Lord of the Rings heroes. So Hitler's SS and his major operatives, his major officers around him in World War II, who were escaped with the help of the Nazis, with the help of the Canary Islands, into Latin America, where they had absolute fan base of fascists that they could join and then start the narcotics trading with. Okay, they were Rabbit's friends, and that's the reason that Steve McQueen, when he won the Oscar last year for No Two Ways a Slave, or whatever his movie was called, he's a black man, he hopped off the stage like a rabbit, right in front of the world's press. The Warren Commission into the killing of JFK by these elites and profiteers. You get it? The Warren for the Rabbit. The Gestapo are the Rabbit's relations. Admiral Darlan is Woozle. The Comte de Paris, Prince Henry d'Orleans, is Monsieur Robin. Okay, here we see the images of the escape of Hitler from the bunker in the Beatles' yellow submarine, using the Sunderland aircraft, the float planes from I forget, Lake Mugall and to the River Spree. The River Spree was used, the submarine was used in the River Spree, and they got the people across the border, and they then were able to get Hitler into Barcelona, where he was allowed to live for several years until Winston Churchill had him killed, because the news was leaking out that he was still alive at Montserrat Abbey, and all of that was revealed by the incredibly courageous and insightful Greg Hallett. Okay, there's the Nazi gold. Everybody knows about the laundering of Nazis from Göttingen, Heidelberg. Göttingen means no God, by the way. That's where the early Jewish people, the scientists the people who were equipped and were close already to those Zionist Americans that wanted the bomb delivered, they were taken out for their scientific skills and their affiliation with the fascist cause. Yeah, we're not talking about the poor Jews who got culled. We're talking about the elites like the sheriffs who are pictured here, who became the Bush dynasty. That's George Poppy Bush that took us into the Kurdish genocide. Only the Kurds get convicted of war crimes. None of the Western leaders or the weapons traders get even a vague warning that justice will catch up with them in the end. We're now into modern day images. This is about fraud now, and the Pandora's Box series that was published by Gordon Bowden and Peter Eyre. And there's President Singh in India, who was forced into resignation because he recognised that the world was seeing that he was a financial criminal, encouraged and sold the products by David Cameron, our august Prime Minister. But somehow or other that's gotten planted in 1942, where the story is a lot more horrific. These are images of Dresden and the brutal firebombing campaign, that all the refugees were drawn into that region. It was a region of vast treasure hoards. They had beautiful museums for artwork. All of the museums were emptied. All of the migrant people, the refugees from all over Europe who had been displaced in the brutal profiteering campaign, were culled by Winston Churchill in a firebombing attack over several days, and it is absolutely tragic. You can see them here on the roasters, and you can see that the corpses are literally burnt to a crisp. It allows the troops, when we eventually launch the initiative where the Allies sweep across Europe, they sweep onto the French beaches, and all of a sudden they're in Berlin, and Hitler is gone in the other direction without a trace, with Eva Braun dressed in a little blue dress. And the BBC understand all of that, and when we retell the story this year, the BBC replay the same old jokes. It's vicious, it's genocidal. And we've got here stories about Shimon Peres, the president of Israel. He's been courageous enough to occupy Israel. The elite Zionists, there's pictures of Treblinka. It is quite tragic. There's the emaciated corpses that they pretend may not have been killed in just the numbers that were actually killed. And if you're now an American president, you make it an obligation that people are not allowed to speak about such things. It's tragic. And so Shimon Peres actually lives for decades beyond the war in the state of Israel that was created by Balfour and by the Rothschild dynasty. And we now see on this page the statement, "One cow in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Poland." Okay, so it's about worth, it's about sacrifice, but all of the elite Jews do not live in Israel or Palestine. They live in mansions like the Rothschilds do, in leafy Europe or in America. And Washington is a beautiful city. I've been there, I've been round it. In the autumn, it's probably even more attractive than the part of Scotland that I live in. It's tragic that the whole of the world has been taken over by those fascists that killed all of the innocent and poor victims of the Holocaust, the innocent bystanders in the bombing campaign, and the traitors and the quislings and the double agents lived in places like Buckinghamshire, like Oxford, like Cambridge, that were immune from bombing, like Heidelberg and Göttingen. Centres of excellence. Peer pressure to the level that you are not exposed to a genocidal risk that all of your countrymen are exposed to. We're now up to 1943 already, and this shows you the beginnings of the creation of Israel. This is Perez in person. His nephew runs an art treasures camp in Spain. So Perez in the desert is living it relatively rough. His relatives are in Latin America and in elite places in Spain, and they have art galleries, no doubt, which are filled with treasures that were other people's during both World War I and World War II. Okay, so there's the Alex Perez Fine Art Gallery in Spain. In recent weeks we've talked about religious fraud and the El Nino Jesus jokes and the merchandising things, and when you look at the video that I made a few days ago about the Gunculator and Hogan's Heroes post-war, it is just confirmation that the teams that were in Intel in the conflict, the teams that were in prison in the conflict, that were not just shot in the head and buried in a shallow grave, they are the elites, they are the officer classes with their manservants, and the people that then get the Oscars when they make the movie about the profiteering jokes. This is the Perez Fine Art web page. You can see the pictures and things. You can see the baby Jesus, which is the El Nino model, which has now been turned into the weather patterns scam that is global warming, which will soon be a tax on breathing. We've got the Ring of Fire, the East India Company, the religious frauds, Flavius Josephus, Arius Piso, and all of the things that appear in the news around that. Piso was the author of the New Testament. When the initials Calpurnius Piso KP appear in the media, it has to be covered up by some terror threat. So you've got Kenyan products. When we republished all of that old news and the things about the loaves and fishes being people's penises cut off, put in a loaf of bread and projected ballistically across a castle wall to the starving people inside as a joke, then you see how vicious the whole of that 2,000-year era has been. 1945, and thankfully the war's over. But then we get more deceit, and you need to try and find Greg Hallett's web pages and look at the Mountbatten reports, the Pearl Harbor stories, the Winston Churchill, Desmond Morton scams, Lord Louis Mountbatten and the Ian Fleming stories. Yeah, all of the ownership of the world is explained by Hallett in those books. Hitler was a British agent, How to Take Over the World, the Sex Collectors. Here's the escape from Berlin in the bunker, through the Lake Spree in the Yellow Submarine, on the aeroplanes, and then eventually into Spain. There's more links on the art treasures in the Perez family in the various locations in Latin America, in Spain, or even in the desert. And we're getting up now to the modern day. We're back up to 1940s and 50s. There's Putin, a full member of the G8 team, no matter what they tell you about him now. He was an intel man in New Zealand. He's in league with Helen Clark, the Labour Party politician who was in charge of New Zealand for 3 regimes back to back when we were down there. And you can see that the Rothschilds now have everything globally stitched up, including the ownership of the issuance of money in Australasia and all across the other continents. Kofi Annan, big man at the UN, married to a Rothschild, like the people that are in the in all of the major financial institutions. Often they change their name and they switch it, or they just slot in a couple of new letters like Rivkind from Rifkind, and all of a sudden the Semitic suspicion is removed. Okay, 1948 we see tiny Roland, the Roland Fierhop, Hitler Youth man, interned in an Isle of Man prison camp but released in mid-war to start the Lonro Empire, the diamonds and the gold mining and the mineral mining opportunities in Africa and in the RSA and Rhodesia in particular. We've got the launch with that of fascism and the apartheid regime and the persecution again of the blacks who should be in charge of their own country but are never given the opportunity. There's the year 1948. In the spring of this year, Rothschilds bribe President Harry S. Truman to recognise Israel as a sovereign state with $2 million, which they give to him on his campaign train. 1949, no pictures, let's just skip it and keep to the highlights or the lowlights. 1961, Norway, that's when they stopped the heavy water production for the nuclear munitions production. Portrayed in Hollywood in Second World War in The Heroes of Telemark. The people who took over were New Zealand. They've got Nobel winning scientists down there like Rutherford. In the Taupo plant they produce the heavy water for the world for a couple of decades. Yeah, all of that revealed by Hallett in very explicit information streams, or referenced or tied to nuclear testing by the French, to the killing of people like Prime Minister Kirk and the launch of Captain Kirk in the Star Trek diversion. Norman Kirk was killed mysteriously and suddenly because the French were testing nuclear devices off the coast of, I think it was the South Island in New Zealand. And all along the western side of Australia you've got Allied troops who are exposed to radiation just so they can do the toxicological research on them. It is vicious. It is run by a man in a pinstripe suit in an office. And then you get the revelations that the Republic of South Africa have similar capacity and that Israel also has a nuclear arsenal. Okay, that's a picture again of Executive Order 1111, John F. Kennedy, and here we have LBJ behind him, who did the dirty, shot him in the head and signed away his federal bank to the Rothschilds again in 1963, all on board Air Force One, which then becomes a Zionist movie about the threat from Eastern Europe and Kazakhstan. Now we're into the 60s and things get really vicious. They're intertwining the religious joke with the geopolitical brutalization of innocent countries in Asia. And this is the war that Muhammad Ali refused to fight in because he did not know anything about the people that he was asked to fight against. Muhammad Ali is actually also a New World Order joke because he was a trader with the East India Company in the Raj in India. He traded with Lord Liverpool, and the jokes about Lord Liverpool and his interactions with people like the Jagier in India are a joke about the launch of the Beatles, the Yellow Submarine joke, the launch of the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stone is pictured here outside Jesus' empty tomb. That's a joke about the sacrifice and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who never existed, who was written about in a fictitious document that has become so influential that it explains all of the martyrdom for 2,000 years and all of the disappearance of indigenous peoples who were pagans in their own place, planted there by God, now been disappeared by El Nino, which was traded, the little baby Jesus icon was traded for their gold or their pearls that were hung round their neck. The brutalization of their countries and the launch of the viruses that culled them was premeditated and was done with automatic weapons. The Rolling Stones are cynical enough to put the brutalisation of Vietnam on the cover of their albums. Agent Orange is used to defoliate that country, and even when I was leaving New Zealand, there are people in those countries who want desperately to understand why the mutations that were induced by those bombing campaigns are still occurring in those countries. I had a PhD student join me in Dunedin, but because I was forced out of my job in Dunedin, and because I have a sense of destiny that I've come back here to prevent all of this, that person came to me in Dunedin to try and do a PhD on that topic, and they were unable to find him a PhD on any other topic because his loyalty was to me and to my science. I find it quite tragic that objective academics can behave like that, but I'd better not talk about it because they paid me a gagging order to shut the fuck up and get on with my career jobless on another continent. Okay, the religious fraud takes us right up into the 1960s, when Alec Douglas Home was Prime Minister and was soon to be taken over or replaced by Harold Wilson. The Garden of Eden is actually Aden. You can see in the maps of Aden, Mazrib, Taiz, Tazir, Sana, the Santa Claus joke. Okay? And you can see that when the Egyptian revolutionaries went down there, it was an imperative for our Labour or Conservative governments, depending on whether you're Alec Douglas Home or Harold Wilson, that the British troops and the British Air Force were deployed to carpet bomb that region and to protect our BP plant in Aden. Can you see how cynical it is? The Garden of Eden is actually the Gulf of Aden, and that's as late as the 1960s. The map that is created on and is printed on in front of the camera there is generated by an agency with the initials NOAA, which reads Noah. Can you see it? Do you get the joke? Christianity is a myth. It's there for mind control, and it's there so that they can take two collections from every denomination every Sunday and keep you in fear about the Islamic menace. Islamic menace is the same story. It's a messianic religion. It's made up by people. It's written about in European centres or in New York, like the Jehovah's story. All of it is a crock of shit to keep you in fear and make you penitent for everything that you have done in your life, while they get away with the genocide. That's covered in a book called The Mysteries of the Creation by Rabbi David Brown, and the pivotal research on the exposure of the New Testament fraud is done by Abelard Reuchlin. You should look him up on YouTube and watch his 5 videos where he's got a piece of chalk in his hand and a blackboard behind him, and you will be convinced that the whole of the religious fraud is a fraud. It was a huge threat to the Jewish nation, and it was part of the art in getting conflict sparked in Germany, all over Europe, all over Russia. Everywhere where the cults have occurred, they use the ethnic and religious hatred as the tool. We're getting down now to the 1960s. This is a chap called Bredenkamp, playing rugby for Rhodesia. He turned into a major weapons trader. Still alive, still at liberty. He was doing his business with David Cameron as a nuclear weapons trader when David Cameron was only 22 years old. I have revealed that fact to Rory Bremner on the streets of Edinburgh in a jocular interview where Rory Bremner came up to me and asked me whether I understood British politics. He knows who I am. He lives right across the road from my sister in my hometown. Yeah? He is a jocular element of the BBC. He is a shame to his nation, like all of the BBC newsmen who are quislings. They tell the story about the world so that they can continue to brutalise the world. And when the African nations were visited by the nuclear weapons delegation, they found it to be nuclear free, and they were given little models of ploughshares. It is absolutely cynical and a crock of lies. Let's quickly go to the bottom. There's the Rolling Stones again, all the explosions. There's Mick Jagger. There's Muhammad Ali. There's the actual Muhammad Ali on the top right of that image. Yeah, the guy with the yellow coat on. And we can see the jokes about Lord McCartney, the jokes about Cairn Energy and the fraud that mean that Singh has to resign as Prime Minister in India, but Cameron can carry on, and Bill Gammell can put his CEO on the court of the Bank of England with the Unison leader Dave Prentice. That's more on the Future of Russia Foundation and the modern day tyranny. Then you've got Bloody Sunday and the launch of General Sir Mike Jackson. In 1972, Mike Jackson was involved in Bloody Sunday in Ireland, the killing of innocent people, the release of the killers of the innocent Irish boys by Tony Blair's regime, and then eventually we get the demonisation of Michael Jackson, the pop singer, when General Sir Mike Jackson was in the Balkans committing genocide, and is in Hansard joking at the amount he can earn as a private security militiaman. It is absolutely ruthless. The villains are portrayed as the heroes. The media cover everything up that they do, and they keep the world's population in poverty. That's President Mugabe in Rhodesia in the early 60s. He's been in power for ages and ages. This is the cover-up of the nuclear weapons scam, the testing regimes in Australasia, the Republic of South Africa's production units, Israel's nuclear stockpile, the awareness of America and the intent to buy in, and then the issuance of those ploughshare awards to nuclear-free countries that were actually vicious weapons traders and still are. This is 2013, and the Gibraltar border scandals, where they were looking for 3 missing nuclear devices that had been sent from the RSA, and I now believe that they have been sent to Australasia. Although the people that I got those information from are very unreliable, they have led to me being sacked by 2 employers, and what they talk about all the time is their novel. The only topics that they want to talk about are the topics that they're trained to spout about. They will not let you go for the genuine world leaders and the culprits, particularly if it impinges on the illegitimate monarchies. There we see some of the jokes out of Africa. The leader of the nuclear weapons inspectorate was Hans Blixen. The Blixen in the film Out of Africa got syphilis, like a lot of the British monarchy. They think it's ever so funny. There's Angela Kane, the head of the World Bank, who was the head of the weapons delegation looking for chemical weapons in Syria. When David Cameron, for the first time in a long time, did the decent thing in British democracy and refused to take Britain to war in Syria on that occasion, because he knew that he was under scrutiny by people like me. There's Prince Charles with Mugabe as they begin to plot the dismembering of those countries, the apartheid regimes the launch of the blacks in Mandela. Mandela was also trained at Tavistock. This is the Georgia Guidestones, where they openly declare that they want world population down to 500 million as soon as they can possibly get it down there, which is why Monsanto and Bill Gates and all the WHO projects that look like immunization programs are supposed to be depopulation programs. I major on financial fraud, and I do not want to comment on such controversial issues, but I strongly believe that HIV was introduced as a cull tool in Africa and also in the Golden Triangle, where it was used to dismember American troops as well as innocent locals. And HIV was suddenly all through those communities, and they were decimated by that, which is a triumph for Nixon, who masterminded it, and Kissinger. So we're into the 80s, we're into death threats on Ronnie Reagan now. Ronnie Reagan contracts dementia. We're into the lead up to the 1980s now. We've got Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands firmly with his ally President Hussein in Kurdistan, who was soon to be the recipient of the Western weapons, some of them from Germany, some of them from the States, some of them from the RSA, and all of them designed to cull as many innocents as they possibly could. And Hussein's assassination, according to Greg Hallett's excellent dissection, was a fake-up. He had 8 to 10 body doubles, and the real Hussein is still at liberty with Lord Lucan and the other elite culprits. Different story in Libya, where the man there took a stand. Gaddafi took a stand against the takeover of his central bank and the issuance of money. This is Putin's period with Hill and Clark in Russia, the sinking of the Lermontov and one of the South Island harbours. We can see that the IMF has now become a laundering tool right in the heart of Washington, run by French leaders like Strauss-Kahn and Madame Lagarde. 1989, we're into Tiananmen Square and the launch of the horrific issues that are led by the Communist Party in China, where every one of the communist families are multimillionaires. The whole story is faked up. The whole thing is run by the Rothschilds and by the Western institutions and by Lord Patton, who was governor of Hong Kong at that time. This is the nuclear scandals in South Africa, where everything was found to be good. What they had to do was to avoid panic when the black man took over the country, when Mandela was elected, in inverted commas. The whole story about Mandela, and when you see at his funeral the world leaders laughing in their selfie pictures, all of the delegates at the funeral are in fur coats. The wealth divide is massive. The ghettos are 10 times larger than before the ANC took over. This is Mel's Park House in Somerset, where the secret meetings to avoid the panic about the Afrikaner takeover by the blacks was held. We're getting close to modern day stuff now. This is the killings of Gerald Bull in Brussels. This is Mrs. Nick Clegg, who is the leader of an assassination bureau in Brussels. You've got Mrs. Margaret Thatcher down there, a fraudster in Finchley since the 1960s. You've got a man called Hutton here, who's the chair of the Arms to Iraq Inquiry. He's an overlapping director with Rifkind on companies that are run from Lothian Road in Edinburgh, and the whole thing is covered up using inquests under University of Warwick rules, which means that you're given a script. If you divert from the untruths that are written on that script, then you will end up with a bullet in your head, and democracy will put you in a shallow grave like David Kelly was put in a shallow grave. This is the first head of the European Central Bank, Wim Duisberg, Dim Wim as the English Tories called him, found dead, face down in his swimming pool.